This is the day that the Lord has made. We should rejoice and be glad in it. Amen. We had our conversation on race and reconciliation this Wednesday, and I was very pleased with the turnout. I was pleased with the conversation and how the different panelists addressed it. Sharon Coe, who is our executive and CEO for International Ministries, talked about it from an international perspective and pointed out that this is not a uniquely American issue, and it's not a uniquely black and white issue. And we had Reverend Pamela Lee, who was the most seasoned among us, who addressed the issue through a longer lifespan than the rest of us had lived. And we also had Rashad Austin from Hutchinson, who I found out that although he's a year younger than me, we have a lot in common when we address this issue. And it's not at all the way that many within the African American community look at it or address it. And so we were excited about that, and we have decided that we're going to have conversations such as this quarterly. We've already set up our December conversation, which is going to address the issue of academia and how they can help with the future of the church, with the way that churches are calling pastors and how church budgets and all of that are going. What can the schools do to help? And we've already had two people confirm, the president of Northern and the president of Sioux Falls. And we have two more out there. And next year we're going to get back into talking about some important conversations that we need to have in the church. Conversations over the issue of sexual orientation and sexuality. Conversations over the issues of ideology and politics. All conversations that we in the church have to have. You can only sweep something under the rug for so long before you don't have any room under the rug anymore. So we need to have those conversations, but we need to be adults about it and have a conversation and not an argument. Amen? And so we're moving on today to finish our conversation about the book of Ruth. And as we talk about the book of Ruth, we are currently in chapter 4. So we're going to talk about the plan completed. We started talking about the plan, but now we're going to talk about the plan completed. And so we're going to look a little bit at how we got here. And before we look at what we talked about each week, let's talk about some of the things that we addressed in the beginning, like the fact that Ruth is one of two that are named after women, the other book being Esther. And I addressed the Bible. I said, we need to stop looking at the Bible, our Holy Bible, the Word as sent to us through human beings, but sent by God. We need to stop looking at it as just a book, but we need to start looking at it as a library. And we know that libraries have sections. And so when we look at the Bible, there are the two main sections. We talked about this in week 1. So you have one section that's called the Old Covenant. And then you have another section that's called the New Covenant. Those are the two big sections in our library. And when we look at the Old Covenant, you have books of the law, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Do not ever try to say that fast, because it's not going to work. And then you have your books of history. And then you have your books of poetry. You have what we call major prophets. And then we have minor prophets. Now, of course, the major and minor doesn't have anything to do with importance. It has to do with long-windedness. Major prophets were more long-winded than minor prophets. Minor prophets could write concisely. They must have all been introverts. And the major prophets must have been extroverts. They needed more to write. And my wife says, wow, but she knows this is true. And when we look in that history section, We see that's where we're going to find the book of Ruth. It is as much a historical document speaking to an event in the history of the early nation of Israel, and really not even the nation, because they're not a nation yet. And then we actually got into our study. So how did we get here? We started by talking about loyalty. We had a picture of loyalty in Ruth. That you have this woman, Naomi, and she has these two daughter-in-laws, Orpah and Ruth. And she tells them, hey, your husbands are dead, my husband is dead, go back home, go to where you'll be safe, go to where maybe you can find another husband and live out the rest of your life. And eventually Orpah agrees to this, and Ruth says, okay, I'll go home. But understand that if you're asking me to do that, going home for me means going home with you, because wherever you go, I'm going to go. Your home's going to be my home. Your God's going to be my God. Where you die, I'm going to die. And where you're buried, I'm going to be buried. We see this picture of loyalty that Ruth shows to her mother-in-law. From there, we move to a picture of kindness. We see kindness in several different ways. We see kindness in Ruth, who goes out each and every day to glean for her and her mother. We see kindness in Boaz, who sees to it that Ruth does not go home empty-handed and that she leaves with more than she needs, and he is also making sure that she is safe. He tells her, don't go anyplace else. You stay right here in my fields, because I've told my workers that they're not to touch you. You will be safe. And we even see kindness, we see God's kindness in the Levitical law, as he has said to the Jewish people, when you harvest your fields, don't harvest everything. Leave something behind. Leave something for the poor. Leave something for the stranger. Then, when we leave this picture of kindness, we move into the plan initiated. And we see a few plans in play here. In the big picture, we're going to see God's plan, but we see Naomi's plan, because Naomi, who has had this loyalty and kindness showed to her by her daughter-in-law, now is going to return that loyalty and kindness and say, I need to find my daughter-in-law a husband. I need to do this because I do not want her to live a life of poverty. I do not want her to live a life where she is constantly gleaning in fields and looking to the kindness of others. And so she has a plan. And the key to that plan is Boaz. She explains this plan to Ruth. And she tells Ruth, this is what I need you to do. And Ruth says, I will do it. She's obedient to her mother-in-law because she trusts her. She trusts the plan of her mother-in-law. She does exactly what her mother-in-law says. And then Boaz says, okay, I'm going to make sure this gets done. What Ruth is asking is, if Ruth is asking Boaz to marry her, Boaz says, okay, I'll consider it, but understand, there's a kinsman redeemer who's closer than I am. I need to make sure he isn't going to do this. But I tell you the truth, as surely as God lives, I'm going to make sure that something happens. You will be taken care of. You will be safe. I promise you this. And so she goes home, and I said that it was kind of like those of you who have ever had a child that goes on a first date, and they come home, and you're waiting to ask, well, how did it go? And that's what Naomi's doing. She waits, and her daughter-in-law comes home, and she says, well, how did it go? And Ruth explains everything. She explains how it went, and Naomi says, well, don't worry, because if Boaz said that he's going to take care of it, it will be taken care of. That brings us to the plan completed. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how this plan, not only Naomi's plan, but God's plan, gets completed. Now, each and every week I asked you a question. The first week I asked you, who is the Ruth in your life? Who is that person in your life that is so loyal that they are always there? Who is that person that no matter what time you call them, they're going to get up and they're going to be there? And week 2 I asked you, who are you a Ruth for? So in other words, who is that person whom you will always be there for? It doesn't matter how much they need you or what they need you for, you're going to be there for them. Week 3, it was a 2-part question. I asked you, what is your calling? What has God called you to? And how are you operating in that calling? And then I said, if you don't know it, pray that God would reveal it to you. Today, we're not going to ask a question, except for to understand that everyone is a part of the plan. And as we prepare to conclude, we will see how everyone is a part of the plan. So we start today, though, with the deal. Now, I don't know if this show still comes on, but years ago, my wife and I used to watch a show called Let's Make a Deal. And I had a friend of mine who knew the names of every one of the Let's Make a Deal models. I thought that was strange, and I thought that it was going to eventually end up with him being arrested for stalking or something. But he knew all of the Let's Make a Deal models for every season almost. And my wife and I would watch it, and of course, if the show doesn't still come on, again, I don't know, because I don't watch that much TV anymore, what would happen is you choose a case, and there was money in that case. Yes? Oh, yeah, wrong show. It's Deal or No Deal. Now let's make a deal. Okay, thank you. So you would choose a case. and then there was an amount of money in this case. And you would open cases. And as you open cases, it would go to the banker, and the banker would make a deal with you. And you would have to decide whether you were going to take that deal or not. Now, what we're going to have here is that Boaz is going to attempt to make a deal with the kinsman redeemer, and he has to decide on that deal. Let's look at what he has to say. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate, and there, when the kinsman redeemer had mentioned came along, Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over to him and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town, and he said, "Sit here." So this is the way that business is transacted in ancient Israel. Wouldn't it be so much easier? You call 10 people over, the two of you discuss it, and you come to a decision. And that's what Boaz is doing here. Then he said to the kinsman redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling a piece of land that belongs to our brother Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention, and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do it. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no other one has the right to do it except you, and I am the next in line." And he says to Boaz, the kinsman redeemer, "I will redeem it." So what he said is that Boaz has basically said, okay, so there's this land that Naomi is selling, and you are the person who can legally buy it. The way this situation worked in Israel is that they wanted the land to always be in ownership of the people of Israel. Predominantly, first you wanted it to stay in the family. If it couldn't stay in the family, you wanted it to stay within the tribe. If it couldn't stay within the tribe, you at least wanted it to stay within the people of Israel. So in the event that there were no male heirs, all of the male heirs had died, you had this kinsman redeemer who was the next in line, the next male in line who could buy the land. If they could buy the land, then fine, they would buy it. But they would also receive the wife, because the wife needs to be taken care of. If they couldn't buy it, then it went to the next person in line, and it went down the line until somebody could buy it. So what Boaz is saying here to the kinsman redeemer is he's saying, you are next in line. You have the right to buy this. Are you going to do it? And the kinsman redeemer says, yes, I'm going to buy it. More land? Of course I'll buy it. But there is a price. So, as he is talking about the deal that he wants to make with the kinsman redeemer, he then gets into what the price is going to be. So then Boaz said, on the day that you buy the land from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabitess, you acquire the dead man's widow in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. Let's freeze there for a minute. He acquires the dead man's widow, which in this case is the son-in-law. And the reason that this is happening is so that the dead man's name can continue. The reason that this is important is because the child that is born to Ruth legally is not going to be the kinsman redeemer's child. He'll be the child of the dead son-in-law. So that can cause some issues, as we are going to see. At this, the kinsman redeemer said, then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. So why is this? Now, we're going to talk about some facts, and then we're going to talk about some possibilities. The fact is, as I said, that the child that is born to Ruth would not be the kinsman redeemer's child legally. It would be the child of Melion, the dead son-in-law. It is assumed at this point that this kinsman redeemer has another wife and has other children. The problem is, any child that he had with Ruth would not only be entitled to the land that he is purchasing, he would also be entitled to any other land because he's still born into that family. So he's saying, I might endanger my estate. Also, Ruth is a Moabite. Now, the text doesn't explicitly say this, but there could have been, knowing the nature of the people of Israel at the time, an issue where, although this was a virtuous woman, although this was an upstanding woman, and from the inferences in the text, a beautiful woman, she's still not an Israelite woman. She's a Moabite woman. And there may have been a little bit of prejudice, a little bit of, not only could I endanger my estate through a child that would be born, I could endanger my estate because I'm marrying a foreigner. So he decides that he's not going to do it. The price is too high. Now, if we go back to 2 weeks ago, at the end of chapter 3, Naomi tells Ruth, she says, don't worry. Boaz is going to make sure that this gets taken care of. If the kinsman redeemer won't do it, Boaz is going to make sure it gets done. And that's when we get to the promise that is being kept. Boaz said, don't worry, I'm going to take care of it. Now, I suspect, again, I don't know this is just my inference and suspicion, that Boaz was really, really hoping that the kinsman redeemer said no. Because I suspect that Boaz really wanted to marry Ruth. I don't even know that he cared all that much about the land. But he made a promise. And the kinsman redeemer says, I can't do it. And so what does Boaz do? He keeps his promise. Let's look at the text. Then Boaz announced to the elders and to the people, today you are witnessing that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Melion. I have also acquired Ruth, the Moabitess, Melion's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses. In chapter 3, Boaz said, I'm going to take care of this. Naomi said, don't worry about it. Boaz is going to take care of it. And Boaz took care of it. It's the same with God and his promises. God makes a promise. He always keeps it. Now, when we read the Bible, we have to be careful. Because sometimes especially the Old Testament, because there are some promises in the Old Testament that are made specifically to Israel. They're promises to that particular group of people. And then there are promises that are made to all believers. So we want to be careful and not to conflate or confuse the two promises. But we also want to understand when God makes a promise, he keeps it. God is the only person in all of existence who has never, ever broken a promise. Now, I've broken some promises from time to time, never intentionally, but I'm human. But when God says something, it will be done. Just like with Boaz, he said, look, I'm going to take care of this. And he took care of it. And so with that, the promise was completed. Naomi appreciated the loyalty and kindness of Ruth. And so because of that, she put together a plan and made a promise that she was going to find a way for her daughter-in-law to be taken care of. And she did. And part of the reason why that plan was able to come together is because Ruth trusted Naomi. And because she trusted Naomi, she was obedient to Naomi. And so Naomi's plan is complete. But God has a hand in all of this. And let's see how that works. Let's look at verse 13. Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Then he went to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive. Now, it is believed that to that point, Ruth may have been barren. Why do we infer that? Well, she was married for 10 years prior, and there were no children. And it says here that the Lord enabled her to conceive. And she gave birth to a son. And so the women, they all gather around Naomi. This is an exciting time because Naomi, who has lost all of her sons, now she has a grandchild. And the women said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout all Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better than 7 sons, that's saying a lot. Because you have to remember, the son inherits everything. The son carries on the name. The son is the one who is the provider. But these women are saying, look, this Ruth who has come into your life is better than if you had had 7 sons. And she has given you a grandchild. And that grandchild would go on to continue to fulfill a plan that God had. For Ruth, the Moabitess, the woman who came to Israel in poverty, the woman who showed so much loyalty to her mother-in-law, the woman who showed so much trust to her mother-in-law's plan, would become the mother of a king and a Messiah. For in the lineage of the Messiah, in the lineage of the great King David, who is even revered today in the nation of Israel, would be this Moabite woman. Let's look at that lineage. This is the family list of Perez. Perez was the father of Hazan, Hazan the father of Ram, Ram the father of Abinadab, Abinadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Solomon, Solomon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David. If we look at that family line, that makes Ruth David's great-grandmother. A Moabitess was a part of the plan, because we know through the line of David comes the Messiah. Why is this so important? Why focus on this? Because everybody and anybody can be a part of the plan. It doesn't matter your financial status. It doesn't matter your social standing. It doesn't matter your race or ethnicity. It doesn't matter how well you speak or how well you don't speak. It doesn't matter if you can pray in public or if you aren't comfortable praying in public. It doesn't matter what you do for a job. It doesn't matter. You can be a part of the plan. And not only can you be a part of the plan, God has a plan for you if you will simply live in it. And understand that at being a part of this plan, and I'm pretty sure as I look around, because I know many of your stories, you understand that being a part of God's plan means that the road gets bumpy from time to time. Amen? It means that it isn't always smooth sailing. It isn't always what my friend John would always say, Skittles and rainbows. You go through some hard times when you're following God's plan. But guess what? Here's the bottom line. You're going to go through the hard times anyway. So is it better to go through hard times by yourself, or is it better to go through hard times with God who will be with you? How do I know God will be with you? Because he always keeps his promises. So I'm going to do something now that if my wife faints, somebody go over there and help her, because I don't do this very often. I don't do vulnerability. It's just not a part of my personality, okay? My wife does. And I, to be totally honest with you, sometimes I don't really understand the importance of it. But apparently it is. So what I want to say to you today is that as a preacher, sometimes we preach theory. It has nothing to do with experience. We're preaching theory. This is what the Bible says, and theoretically. And sometimes we preach life experience, but we're preaching life experience that we have seen through others. And every once in a while we preach life experience that we've lived. I want you to know, as I'm talking about Ruth, and as I'm talking about the plan of God, and as I'm talking about life and that knowing that God sees you through perilous times, I am not speaking theoretically. I'm speaking on experiences that I know because I know you. I'm speaking from personal experience. I want you to think back to February. That's a good month if you lived in Kansas City. Anybody remember what happened in February? Super Bowl. See, people remember. 50 years, right? 50, 51, 52 years. 2020 is looking like it's going to be a really good year in February. Unfortunately, you have to go to March. We all know what happened in March. In March, as a pastor, there's this scramble. How are we going to do worship? Do we have the equipment? We need to do worship. How are we going to visit people? How am I going to make sure that the congregation is okay? Especially the elderly people in the congregation. I hope no one gets sick. I hope I don't get sick. What am I going to do with my family? Not ship them off to Mississippi. But at that time, I'm thinking, what am I going to do with them? And luckily, I was able to work with a good group of leaders here at this church, and we figured it out. But then April 8th happened. I was sitting right there in that library. I had just gotten through with a devotion. And my phone rings, and it's my aunt. And she just said 2 words: she's gone. I pretty much knew what the call was going to be about, but on that day, of course, COVID-19, the coronavirus, which is something that I had seen on TV, which is something that had been something that's happening in New York, in California, and Washington, became a reality to me. Because that was the day that my mother passed away as a result of coronavirus. And we're still trying to figure out how to do church and how to make sure that everyone else is taken care of and how to make sure that my family is taken care of and how to make sure that my aunt doesn't lose her mind because she just lost her sister. But God, He has a plan. I'm letting you know at this particular point in time, I wasn't liking God's plan. It didn't feel right to me. But like Ruth trusted Naomi, we have to trust God even in those difficult times. March and April and May and June were difficult months. Especially May, June, and July, because believe it or not, I know this sounds crazy, but the quiet house gets to you after a while when you don't have your family around. But God had a plan. Now things started to get better around July. Do we know what happened in July? We called Pastor Jessica. You've heard me say it, but thank God. Flourish His plan. Because I'm going to let you all know that the church and me personally am in a better place because she is here. And then the family came back. God has a plan. And I'm starting to see bits and pieces of it. He won't show me all of it. And I'm pretty sure there are going to be more bumps in the road, like online school. Lord help us. One sitting right here, one sitting in Morgan's office, my office door open. We'll figure it out. But God has a plan for you. He has a plan for this church. He has a plan for our denomination. He has a plan for His body. And yes, there are going to be times when we are like Ruth and we're gleaning in the fields in the hot sunlight. But know that God has a plan. Just trust in His plan. And here's the harder thing to understand. It doesn't always end with the Skittles and rainbows. But for us, we all know the ultimate end. The ultimate end is some very important words that we all want to hear, which is, well done, my good and faithful servant. Enter into the kingdom that I have prepared for you. But we need to follow the plan. Through the hills and the valleys, through the hardships and the difficulties, through death and loss, we still have to follow the plan. And the great thing about it is, if we follow God's plan, we're not alone. He's always with us. Even in those times when we want to cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I think it's important for you to know, because I know that many of you have had those moments. So have I. You know why? Because we're human beings. The important thing is that we be like Ruth, who trusted in her mother's plan. We need to trust in God's plan. Because I can tell you, it's a great plan. Amen.